Welcome to the Mac's Future Weekly Podcast. All Apple talk and no chit chat.
Okay, welcome to the Apple Podcast, and this is Lex at maxfuture.com, and today is, It's August 12th, 2011, and we have a lot of Apple news today, and so let's get to it. This is a chit-chat-free podcast about Apple news, Apple products, all sorts of Apple things. So let's get to it. Okay, so the big news this week was a couple of days ago, Apple for the first time surpassed Exxon as the most valuable public company in the world. So as you may know, that this week the stock markets have been incredibly volatile, going up and down, up and down, up and down. And Apple stock, which had been at a high of $400, went down to, into the $368 range. But interesting things happened on that way down. Turns out there's only one company in the world that's a public company that had a bigger market cap than Apple, and that was Exxon, the gigantic oil company. And the oil company stock went down faster or more than Apple. So Apple at one point, its market capitalization surpassed Exxon. And I took a screenshot of the Yahoo Finance page that showed the market capitalizations. And for example, it passed it on Wednesday and again on Thursday. And at one point on Thursday, let's see, Apple's market capitalization was $341 billion, and Exxon's was $338 billion. But so what is market capitalization? Market capitalization is if you took all the stock of a company and multiplied it by the stock price, that's what the market values the company as. In other words, if you bought all the stock of the company, you would completely own the company. So if you took the stock price times the outstanding shares, that's how much you would have to pay to buy the entire company. Well, Apple briefly became the most valuable company of a public company in the world. There may be other companies like the Saudi oil company. That's a private company. Its shares are not traded on a public exchange. That might be more valuable, but we don't know. We measure it by what's traded on a public exchange like the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, and so Apple became number one. Now that was, to me, this is a truly historic occasion because, remember in the late 1990s, Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy and had to endure the humiliation of getting funds from Microsoft. And if you remember, Michael Dell, who is the founder and CEO of Dell Computers back then, was saying that Apple should just dismantle itself and distribute the proceeds to shareholders. Now, since then, the most incredible turnaround in corporate history has occurred. All of it spurred, with the return of the founder, Steve Jobs, to Apple. Since his return, Steve Jobs has taken Apple to the ultimate height of business success. Apple and Steve Jobs are now sitting on top of the world. So Apple is the most valuable public company, and as I said in a post, I'd like to congratulate Apple and Steve Jobs for truly one of the most incredible comebacks in corporate history. Okay, one of the more interesting things that happened this week in terms of competition with Apple, and actually that affects Apple, is that Amazon released a Kindle app for the iPad and other devices that's HTML based. So it's a web app that you can download. But what really makes this interesting, it's basically Amazon's way of doing an end round around Apple's in-app subscription policy, which is that Apple takes 30% cut, and Apple doesn't allow you to have an app that takes you to an external store with a link in the app unless Apple's taking a 30% cut. So the current regular native iOS app for the iPad and other devices, the current version of the Kindle app, that's an iOS app, doesn't have any link to purchase any ebooks in through the app or a link to the website. Instead, you have to go independently to Amazon's website to buy a Kindle ebook and then send it to your iPad or other iOS device. But Amazon did something very clever. It came up with a Kindle HTML5 web app, and you can download it. And what's very clever about it is that it can do things sort of offline that I've never seen done with a web-based app. So I have a screenshot here that I put on my blog that shows that when I downloaded it and saved it to my iPad desktop, it said, do you want to increase the database size? In other words, that the web app takes up on my iPad. It says, and the site for this Kindle web app is https //read.amazon.com. So the little pop-up window came up and said, do you want to allow https read.amazon.com, end quote, to use up 50 megabytes of storage on your iPad? And I said, okay, increase. So this is really cool, because then what it means is there's now space in this web app to store your ebooks. Now here's the thing. I downloaded it on my iPad, and it doesn't work for me offline. So maybe there's a glitch in how I installed it. Maybe I have to install it again. But this is huge, because what this means is, there's going to be more of an effort to have web apps that work on your iOS devices and other smartphones and tablets. And it's a way to get around Apple's 30% cut. So to me, what was very interesting was just how sophisticated this HTML5 app is. It's not as good as the native app, but the point is that HTML5 web apps that run on your smartphone or your iPad or other tablet or device, mobile device, are starting to get better and better. And so maybe at some point HTML5 will start to really feel and look like a native app. But I guess because Apple controls the hardware, Apple controls the hardware of the iPad and the iPhone, it can always do things to limit the ability of an HTML5 app to have all the same features as a native app. Sort of limit things that can affect the hardware or access the hardware. So this is a very interesting development, and I think we're going to see more and more of it as people who provide content are trying to get around Apple's requirement that Apple take a 30% cut of in-app subscriptions or in-app sales. So we'll see more of this. Okay, other interesting news this week is that the District Attorney of San Mateo County in California has finally released an official statement regarding where that investigation has gone regarding the stolen or lost iPhone 4 prototype, which remember back in the spring of 2010, before the iPhone 4 came out, there was this whole controversy because somehow the website Gizmodo got what purported to be the prototype of the iPhone 4, and they got it from someone who they paid, who claimed to have found it at a bar back in March 2010. And if you remember, the San Mateo District Attorney's Office, I guess, brought charges or started investigating a couple of young men out in California who purportedly found it in a bar. And also Gizmodo. Remember, they raided Gizmodo employee Jason Chen's home, where he had a home office. Well, the San Mateo District Attorney's Office announced the other day this week that it had filed misdemeanor charges against two individuals for the misappropriation of an iPhone 4 prototype. This is what the official quote from the San Mateo District Attorney says. That was lost by an Apple employee and subsequently recovered in a Redwood City establishment by the defendants on May 25, 2010. So they charged Brian Hogan, 22, of Redwood City. He was charged with 1 count of misappropriation of lost property, and they also charged Sage Wallauer, 28, of Emeryville, who also was charged with misappropriation of lost property and possession of a stolen property. And they were arraigned they're supposed to be arraigned on Thursday, August 25th at 9 o'clock in Redwood City. They also say in the statement that, quote, after a consideration of all the evidence, it was determined that no charges would be filed against employees of Gizmodo, end quote. So basically, Gizmodo gets off pretty light. In other words, it's not charged in any way. And these young men who sold the so-called lost iPhone 4, they're facing misdemeanor criminal charges, which has to suck for them. So, I don't know how fair this is. I think the San Antonio District Attorney made some statements about how it was hard to bring a case against Gizmodo because they're journalists. On the other hand, I don't think journalists are allowed to pay for what could be misappropriated or stolen property. So, if I was Jason Chen, I'd feel pretty lucky not having had any charges brought against him, and the same for Gizmodo. So the l'affaire iPhone 4 prototype appears to be over. We'll have to see if these two individuals fight the misdemeanor charges or if they take a plea. So very interesting outcome. Now, if you have a Mac and you have Lion on it and you're concerned about how you're going to rebuild your system if something bad goes down, well, Apple has helped people out by releasing some software that you can download called the Lion Recovery Disk. Now, with Lion, what Apple is doing is having the hard drive have a hidden partition that has software in it so that you can reinstall Lion. This is something that didn't exist before prior to Lion. Snow Leopard and Leopard didn't have it. But I guess some people are having problems with that partition or accessing it. So Apple has released a Lion Recovery Disk Assistant, and this is what it says it does. It says, built right into OS X Lion, Lion Recovery lets you repair disks or reinstall OS X Lion without the need for a physical disk. And it says the Lion Recovery Disk Assistant lets you create Lion Recovery on an external drive that has all of the same capabilities as the built-in Lion Recovery. Reinstall Lion, repair the disk using disk utility, restore from a time machine backup, or browse the web with Safari. And it goes on to say, in order to create an external Lion Recovery using the Lion Recovery Assistant, the Mac must have an existing Recovery HD. And it goes on to say, to create an external Lion Recovery, download the Lion Recovery Disk Assistant application, insert an external drive, launch the Lion Recovery Disk Assistant, select the drive where you would like to install, and follow an on-screen instruction. It goes on to say, when the Lion Recovery Disk Assistant completes, the new partition will not be visible in the Finder or Disk utility. To access Lion Recovery, reboot the computer while holding down the Option key. Select Recovery from the Startup Manager. Now you can install this on an external flash drive. Now what's interesting is this isn't the same method as taking an image of the entire Lion install and installing it on an external flash drive. For that you need more than 4 gigabytes of flash drive, because what you're doing there is putting the whole Lion install. This is just the recovery software. And so my understanding is it's actually less than 1 gigabyte, so you could put it on a small flash drive. So what this is doing is it's launching the recovery assistant So it can help, do disk utility fixing of your hard drive that has line on it in terms of the preferences. But my understanding is what this does is it allows you to use an external flash drive to install line, but then it goes to the internet to pull down the line image and install it. So, and it's an interesting utility. I have not used it yet, but I will test it to see how well it works. Okay, one of the smart business moves that Apple made this week is that it released a school, an educational model of the iMac, a 21.5-inch model, and using Core i3 processors, and under $1,000. And so this was first a rumor that I saw on electronista.com, but sure enough, on Apple's website, there is this educational model of the iMac, the 21-inch, under $1,000. So that's very smart. Apple has always been very good in the educational market, and having a low, cheap version of the iMac makes total sense. Apple's selling a lot of iPads, but the iMac is something that you see a lot of in schools, and having a cheap one makes total sense. So, kudos to Apple, and I think this will help them continue to grow in the educational market. Okay, one of the most exciting pieces of news for Apple this week was that Apple, in its patent battles with Samsung, has scored an incredible victory in Europe. Apple was able to get what's known as a preliminary injunction in Germany, preventing Samsung from selling the Galaxy Tab 10.1 across Europe, except for Netherlands. Apple also has legal actions in Netherlands to extend the injunction there. So apparently, Samsung is now appealing that ruling, and I guess the standard for getting a preliminary injunction on patent cases in Germany is pretty easy. But this is really a tremendous blow for Samsung. Remember, Apple's claiming essentially that Samsung is copying the iPad and the iPhone, essentially cloning them, making them look, in terms of trade dress, very similar, the Galaxy products, to the iPad and the iPhone, as well as other maybe patent violations. But this is a huge business blow for Samsung. We'll see if Samsung can undo it. And some people have been very critical of Apple, saying, Apple should compete on the merits, and that, it shouldn't use patent litigation. But on the other hand, if you've created something, you should try to defend it, particularly if you spent a lot of money creating it. Now, in terms of Apple clobbering Samsung in these patent battles, I guess Apple has to be a little bit careful, because Samsung is one of the huge part suppliers for Apple, particularly for the iPhone 4 and for, I guess, the iPad. Some of the key components of the iPhone 4 are supplied by Samsung, including flash memory, DRAM memory, and altogether it accounts for 26%, according to Gizmodo, of the final component costs of the iPhone 4. But I know that other Samsung things are Apple products. For example, my brand new MacBook Air, the 11-inch, has a Samsung SSD drive, which is supposed to be better than another drive that Apple uses in these MacBook Airs. So, what I'm told by the different blogs that I read is that Samsung's vast business empire is divided up and compartmentalized, so that the part of Samsung that supplies parts to Apple is different than the part of Samsung that makes the iPad competitor or the iPhone competitor. And so maybe Samsung will continue supplying parts to Apple, even if Apple crushes Samsung in patent litigation regarding the competing products that Samsung makes. But you know what? Maybe Apple should really get other suppliers, because maybe Apple can't trust Samsung. Apple is having Samsung make certain parts for its products like the iPhone 4 and the iPad, and how do we know that Samsung isn't studying the orders and then letting the other side of Samsung know, hey, these are the kind of components that Apple uses? It seems to be kind of risky to have your major competitor also make your parts. So maybe in the future, Apple's going to try to, farm out the production of components to other companies. And, in the long run, it's kind of a strategic risk for Apple to be so heavily dependent on Samsung when Samsung is competing with Apple. So I think Apple has to really rethink that relationship with Samsung, given how much it's in competition with Samsung. I mean, the same could be said about Google products. Apple relies on Google Maps to have a really good map on the iPhone and the iPad, but Apple's also competing with Google, which is making Android phones and Android tablets. Apple also relies on Google for YouTube being on the device. So it's kind of a troublesome, relationship that Apple has with some of these large tech companies. Now, new information has come out evidencing how much the iPhone and Android devices are dominating the smartphone market, and I saw this on cultofmac.com, which reported earlier this week, I guess, some statistics that came out in terms of worldwide smartphone sales to end users by operating system in the second quarter of 2011. And according to the source, which is Gartner's, Apple has something like 14.1% of the smartphone market in the second quarter of 2010, and that share has increased to 18% of the smartphone market in the second quarter of 2011. But what's really interesting is that Android devices went from being 17% a year ago in the same quarter to 43% in 2011. Symbian, which is what Nokia used as an operating system, plummeted from 40% of the smartphone market to 22%. So Apple's in second place in terms of the number of smartphones sold, but Apple is actually doing very well because it has a majority of the profits, which makes a lot of people think that the Android devices are being sold really, really cheap, almost being given away for free, because how come they're not making a lot of profits? But it basically shows you like how these two smartphone platforms, Android and iOS, are dominating the smartphone market. And RIM, which makes BlackBerry, it plummeted from 18% to just 11% of the smartphone market, and Microsoft went from 4.9% of the smartphone market to just 1.6%. So we're going to have to see how Apple fares after the iPhone 5 comes out. I think that Android Steam is coming to an end, because I think a lot of people got Android phones because AT&T was the only platform for the iPhone, and now that it's on Verizon, I think more and more people are switching to the iPhone from Android. And once the iPhone 5 comes out, there might be a lot more people who were on Android who are going to switch over to the iPhone. So I don't know. I predict that Apple's share is going to continue to rise of the smartphone market, and maybe now at the expense of Android. Okay, so a lot of people are itching to get the iPhone 5 and are itching for Apple to announce the iPhone 5, and the website MacRumors.com did something very interesting. There had been a lot of rumors about what the iPhone 5 is going to look like, a lot of leaks regarding the design specifications. Well, MacRumors did something kind of clever. They went out and they commissioned a company called Cesari's design to create high-quality renderings based on these rumors to guess what the iPhone 5 would look like. And measurements, according to them, were taken against the original case design leaks, and then they put it into a 3D modeling software. And so if you go to their website, and I have a link on my blog, it'll show you what they think that the iPhone 5 will look like. And it's basically a thinner version of the iPhone with a wider screen, or the screen goes all the way to the edge of the front of the iPhone, and it has sort of a tapered teardrop, like the iPad look to it. And instead of a glass back, it has a back sort of like the iPad. And I think this is very, very plausible. I mean, we'll have to see what it actually looks like when it comes out. This speculative design says that the new design is calculated to be 4.33 inches times 2.36 inches times 0.27 inches thickness at the top and 0.21 inches at the bottom. So it speculates that the new design is actually shorter than the existing iPhone, but slightly wider and thinner. So look, this is just speculation, but it would look kind of cool. I mean, the thing with the iPhone, 5, do you really want it super thin? Because if I think it gets super thin, you just get really paranoid that it's going to break easier. You don't want it too wide because you want to make sure it fits into pockets pretty easy. But God, don't you think everyone's going to get upset their cases and their docks are all going to look different? Now, in terms of when the iPhone 5 is going to come out, there had been all sorts of rumors, and the last rumor was that it was not going to be released till October. But now, MacRumors reports via a website called Callouts, which is a Japanese site, that Apple is planning a fall media event to occur on Wednesday, September 7th. And Apple always holds a fall media event, usually iPod related. And some people are speculating that Apple will release an iPod and not the iPhone 5, and maybe just pre-announce it. I don't think that's the case, because if you think about it, the iPod Touch is always revealed at this music or media event. And it would be very strange for Apple to release the new iPod Touch before the iPhone 5. Now, most likely the iPhone 5 will have the A5 processor that's currently in the version of iPad 2. And in the past, what's happened is that the iPad gets the new processor. That's what happened last year. The iPad got the A4, and then the iPhone 4 comes out with the A4 processor, and then a few months later in the fall, the iPod Touch gets the A4 processor. So I think it would be really weird if the iPod Touch came out first with the A5 processor, followed by the iPhone 5. So what I think will happen is that the iPod Touch will come out at the same time as the new iPhone, or come out after the new iPhone, but not vice versa. So anyways, September 7th is going to be very exciting. Well, one thing I'd like to see going forward with the iPhone as it develops is to further the freedom that you have from the carriers. Now, Apple pioneered the freedom with the first iPhone. Remember, prior to the first iPhone, most carriers totally controlled the hardware. You had no choice what you could do with the hardware or what the hardware manufacturers could do. For example, I remember having a phone with Verizon that supposedly could take pictures, and I couldn't get pictures off the phone unless I paid Verizon 15 cents a photo. That phone, which was an LG phone, also had a USB connection, but Verizon crippled it, so you couldn't even use it. And if you wanted to buy ringtones, you had to pay Verizon like $2 or $3 or $4 a pop, even though I can make my own ringtones using GarageBand on a Mac. So Apple really pioneered the freedom from the phone carriers with the first iPhone. by insisting that if AT&T wanted to distribute it, that AT&T couldn't have anything on the iPhone. No software, no emblems. In fact, the only thing of AT&T on the iPhone is if you have an iPhone on the AT&T network, you see a little AT&T symbol where the carrier connection is. But the future might be even brighter, because Cult of Mac uncovered something, or actually reported on something, I think, patently Apple uncovered. No, actually it was discovered by Apple Insider. And that Apple has a patent application entitled Method and Apparatus for Using a Wireless Communication Device with Multiple Service Providers. And basically, it's going to make it easier in the future if you have an iPhone that can work on different wireless networks to pick a carrier. So, what this sort of indicates is that Apple does have plans in the future to have one iPhone which can work on Verizon, which can work on AT&T, which can work on any carrier. And I think that's the gold standard. I mean, personally, I'm more and more thinking, why do we have cell phone carriers? Why don't we just have carriers that provide data service? Because look, I said this before, the iPad, you just have a data connection through AT&T for $25 for 2 gigabytes. And there's software that turns the iPad into a phone. So once you use that software, which is Line 2, which costs $10 a month, the iPad becomes a phone that only costs $35 a month. But when you have an iPhone and use it on AT&T charges you $50 a month at least for the phone calls, and then another $25 a month for 2 gigabytes worth of data. And the phone call is data, so it's kind of silly. So Apple, I think, eventually is going to want to have a device which is not beholden to any network and doesn't charge customers an arm and a leg to have a connection. So this patent is very kind of cool. If you look at it, the way it's sort of designed, it's got these boxes that say how it would work. The first box says access identifier value stored in mobile wireless communication device. Select a carrier service configuration. Profile stored in mobile wireless communication device based on accessed identifier values. Rank selected carrier service configuration profiles. Configure mobile wireless communication device using highest ranked carrier service configuration profile. So what this patent does is there'll be an application which will show you who are the providers in your area and who has the best deal, who has the best services, and what are the features, and then you'll be able to pick it when you activate your iPhone. So it's just a patent application now, but it just shows you how innovative the company is being. Now, there was a development with Google Plus, the social service from Google this week, actually yesterday or the day before, that threatens Apple as well as Facebook and other platforms. And that is, Google announced that there is going to be Google Games now on Google Plus. So, and Google is only taking a 5% cut of any game or funds raised through a game on Google Plus, which is a lot less than the 30% that Apple charges for games or apps on the platform. And as Google Plus is a web-based platform, eventually you're going to be able to use it easier and easier on iOS devices. And so what All Things Digital, which is a web blog that is part of the Wall Street Journal, says is that this poses a threat to Apple, because Apple's a big gaming platform. So if developers think that they can develop HTML5 games that work well on Google Plus and have them be available on iOS devices like the iPad, and that Google's just going to take 5% cut, this could maybe pull away some business from Apple. But I think developers are going to have to first see that a lot of people are paying for games on Google Plus before they defect, because right now the iOS App Store is a money machine for a lot of developers. Now, the famed Fifth Avenue Apple Store, in case you've heard, is going through a complete redesign of its famous glass cube. And I guess some photos were released and obtained by the Gothamist, and they were released by Apple to the Gothamist, which show what the new structure will look like. And the key is the currently dismantled glass cube over the Fifth Avenue Apple Store is made up of lots of little pieces of glass that are sort of assembled. So while it is a big cube, it's got dozens, if not hundreds, of small glass pieces. And the new cube, which is costing several $1 million, is going to be just comprised of big slabs of glass. So it's going to be just a few gigantic glass panels that are very, very strong, and so it's going to have a cleaner, crisper look. So instead of using 90 panes of glass, it's going to use 15 panes of glass. And I expect sometime in the fall it'll be revealed, because I'm sure that Apple is going to want the cube up and revealed before Christmas or the holiday season, because it's one of the most photographed landmarks in New York City. And I know people are missing it because right now it's boarded up. So I can't wait to see it. Now, if you upgraded to Lion on your Mac, there are some new screen sharing features. And I didn't even really know they existed, but GigaOM.com on the Apple blog did a really nice post from Daryl Earthington on August 8th, where he highlights really some of the great new features in screen sharing, and I have a link to his blog, and it's really helpful. He points out, for example, that some of the new things with screen sharing are that you can now log into other Macs on your network, not only with an authorized user account on that machine, but also with an Apple ID. And also you can specify, it says, individuals manually or add them from your address book. So you have much more flexibility into allowing login remotely on a per user basis. So he points out that this new feature in screen sharing eliminates the need to create a separate user account just for remote access. So you can add like a relative from your address book. The other thing that's in there that he points out is observe mode, which is new, which is you can use that for when you want to watch what a user is doing in order to provide them with accurate text support. And for observe mode, you can add an icon to the toolbar and pick switch to view, switch to observe mode. Then the other thing that he points out is that there's something called virtual display mode. And he says if you want to just create a setting or start a download without interrupting someone else's currently using the computer you're accessing, there's a new virtual display mode designed to do just that. He says it will provide you with your own desktop that doesn't interfere with what's currently being shown on the Mac that's actually connected to the display. So this is pretty cool. You can sort of access someone's computer and they don't see you interrupting their use. What you do is you go into the virtual display mode by going to View and select Switch to Virtual Display. And then you can switch back by going View, Switch to Hardware Display. So these are very interesting new tips that GigaOM found regarding screen sharing. And, kudos to them. I didn't see it, and they did. Now, good news for anybody who's planning on getting a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro in the future, or who has the current brand new MacBook Air. Well, and that is that Samsung has just released updates to its SSD drives These are their flash-based drives, so that they now go to 6 gigabytes per second SATA 3, which can read data as fast as 500 megabytes per second and writes at 350 megabytes per second. Now, as I previously pointed out, the current MacBook Airs have internal eSATA connections that are 6 gigabyte per second ready. But the current SSD drives, the one that I have in my MacBook Air, which is a Samsung, is still running at 3 gigabytes per second. So it's still a speed demon. It reads and writes around 240 megabytes per second. Now, to give you a comparison of what that means, on my 2010 iMac, where I just have a regular hard drive, I'm getting read-write speeds of around 50 or 60 megabytes per second. So my MacBook Air with 3 gigabytes per second SATA 3 connection SSD drive is like 5 or 6 times faster on accessing the read-write to the SSD drive. And let me tell you, it makes a world of difference having an SSD drive. I mean, the MacBook Air that I have, it has a dual-core i5 processor at 1.6 gigahertz, and yet it feels much, much zippier than my quad-core 2.93 i7 processor in my 2010 iMac. And that's all because I have an old-fashioned hard drive in my iMac, and in my MacBook Air I have an SSD drive. But what this update means is that Apple could just bump up in the future, put better 6 gigabits per second drives into the MacBook Airs, even in the current MacBook Air. Also, Otherworld Computing, which is a great site that provides updates to your Macs, they'll probably get this Samsung 6 gigabits per second SATA drive and offer it as a install and upgrade to your MacBook Air. And there's on their website they have an instructional video that shows you how you can do it with another drive. But really, it makes sense to have a Samsung drive. And the other thing is these Samsung drives are much bigger. They have 512 gigabyte capacity, and which is a nice bump up from the current 256 gigabyte offered in the MacBook Air. So, it's a great upgrade opportunity in the future when the prices come down for these things. Okay, so if you're into screen recording on your Mac, there's been a major update to one of the premier screen recording apps on the Mac. That's ScreenFlow by Telestream.net. And ScreenFlow costs $99 in the Mac App Store. The major competitor to ScreenFlow is Camtasia, which also costs $99. And they're great for screen recording on your Mac and also doing a video recording of yourself. And now ScreenFlow is up to version 3. And, a little disclaimer, I purchased and used Camtasia. I really like Camtasia. Now, what are some of the new things that are very cool in ScreenFlow 3? One of them is something called freehand callouts. So apparently you can now call out a region of the screen just by painting a brush anywhere. And I've checked it out, and it's really kind of cool. Let me see if I can show you. Okay, so this is final. This is ScreenFlow 3. And this is the cool way to add a call out. So, let's say this is your timeline on the bottom. Let's say I want to do a call out right here. So I go to the menu on the right, and you see there's different tabs, and you go to call out properties. Click call out, add call out. There's a little screen. I'll click do not show this message again. It gives you a little video on how to do the call outs. But the key is this: in the menu, click freehand. And then you see you have a little round freehand call-out thing that you can sort of draw on the video screen, and you can change the size to make it a big circle. It's almost like a pencil, or you can make it a small one. You can also make it, I guess like a rectangle. But let's stick with the circle. This is the cool part. So watch this. I'm just gonna do a call out here. I'm like drawing, and there you go. And if you look in the area that I have the call out, that is the call out, and you can change in the call out. You can do the opacity. You can play with the opacity, and you can affect the blur. So in the call out itself, you could make it blurry. So this is useful if you want to blur some part of the screencast or the screen grab that you do that you think is confidential. You can also blur the background and not blur the call out, so that can further highlight. You can also zoom in, so you can give it a shadow to make it more dramatic, like you're ripping it out of the screen gap that the call out is. And it's very cool. Now the other thing is you can create like a rectangular call out, and let's see, can you affect? You should be able to change the size of that. I don't know why it doesn't change, but that's pretty cool too. You can create these like square callouts too. So the callouts are one of the big improvements in ScreenFlow 3. Now, some of the other cool things that you can do with ScreenFlow 3 that are new in it are you can have video annotations. You can draw circles, squares, lines, and arrows over your video content and add movement and transition to your annotations. One of the things that I think is really cool is timeline enhancements. You can reorder, delete, and resize the height of your tracks, group clips, insert gaps, select and remove gaps, and many more improvements. Now, the selecting and removing gaps is huge because when I do this using Camtasia, there's often gaps between my little clips, and it looks like in ScreenFlow you can just quickly delete those gaps. Other key features are powerful audio quality controls, and so you've got more sound editing tools in there. You can view the audio waveforms. You can view clipped audio peaks to see the effects on volume. You can remove background noise and smooth volume. You can export settings, including an iPad export. So if you want to publish for the iPad or publish to Vimeo, you have that in there. And plus it's Lion compatible. So ScreenFlow has made some really big improvements. I'm still using Camtasia. At some point I'm going to do a little comparison between the two. But you have two great tools to choose from now. Okay, one of the cool things released this week is that Google finally updated the Google Plus app for the iPhone so that it now works also on the iPad. The bad news is, though, it's not iPad, designed. It's really just an iPhone app on the iPad, but now you have sort of a native app on the iPad for Google Plus. And it's pretty basic. It's not as good as the website. Here you can see your streams. Here are my incoming streams. It's pretty basic. You can you can scroll up and down if you want to write a post, and there's a little sign. One of the things that's a little annoying is that you can't you don't have the drop down little window for putting in links or attachments, but you can attach a photo or take a photo and post it. You can actually cut and paste a link just in the place that you type. Let's see, I'm gonna cancel. You can see your circles. You can see your I guess you can start a huddle from here. You can pick your circles, and then let's see, I'm following a number of people, and then click the posts from those people, or click photos and see the photos. But overall, it's not as robust as the using the the website through a computer. One of the things that's annoying is that if you use Chrome on a computer, you can actually put in all sorts of great Google Plus extensions, and I'll take a look at some of the cooler extensions that have come out in Google Plus. Now, one of the cooler extensions that I have in Chrome on my Mac that works with Google Plus, which I recommend, particularly if you have a Twitter account or a Facebook account, is SG Plus. And SG Plus is an extension that allows you within Google Plus to send posts to your Twitter feed and to your Facebook feed. And it's pretty cool. Let me show you. So if I've got it installed here, and I think it's right up here, SG Plus, and a window pops down, and it says turn off Facebook features, turn off Twitter features, and you can sign into Facebook, you can sign into Twitter, and then you see in your stream your Twitter and Facebook stuff. Let me show you. Okay, so using this plugin for Chrome on the Mac, you then have your Twitter feed and your Facebook feed in your G Plus feed, which makes it very convenient. So look, in my main feed now, I see Twitter posts, and there's like a little Twitter icon, and you go down. Actually, the iPad Podcast, like a weekly podcast within from Mac's Future account. And,
okay.
So, for example, here's this life hacker tweet, and I'm going to just click retweet, and a little window pops up on the right. It says it's sharing, so SG Plus, it's called SG Plus, is sending that, it's retweeting it. The other cool thing is if I post something, I can choose. You see these little two Twitter and Facebook little icons next to my how I want my post to be on G+. So I'm going to write SG Plus is a great G+ extension. So that's what I'm going to write. Great. Now watch this. I'm gonna share it, and it's going to Facebook, and it's going to Twitter. So it's ending up as a Twitter post for me. So SG Plus is I find it to be one of the best extensions for unifying your Facebook and Twitter posting. Now, what I would like to see, if somebody creates an extension that then also puts your Google Plus posts to Tumblr, because I use Tumblr for my main blog. Now, if you don't want to see your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed, you can turn that off in the extension. The extension has lots of preferences. If you go up here on the right, you can say merge feed into main G+ stream, show feed underneath Sparks. So there's a lot of cool modifications that you can make. So if you've got, by the way, if you go to my, if you email me at maxfuture@gmail.com, I'll send you an invitation to Google+. I've got a lot more invitations left. I'll also put a link on my blog at maxfuture.com, and you can get in that way. So check it out. Okay, so that rumor regarding an event on September 7th, it turns out like that's now being denied. This is at the beginning of the podcast, that was the rumor. So now we're talking maybe about an October 7th date instead, not September 7th, October 7th. So anyways, who knows what the rumors are? Who knows when the iPhone 5 is coming out or the iPad 3? Everything keeps changing quickly. All right, well, thanks for listening to episode 84 of the Apple Podcast. This is Lex at maxfuture.com. Again, if you want an invite to Google+, just email me at maxfuture@gmail.com. This is a chit-chat-free podcast, and you can support me by giving a positive review in the iTunes store, and also checking out the video version of this on the Mac's Future channel on YouTube or on Blip TV. So thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This has been a Mac's Future production.